Hi, Jane.
Hi, Brink. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
So it looks like the long national nightmare that is the Democratic race for the presidential nomination may or may not be over. AP, I just see, has just put out very recently their story that they call it clinched for Obama. They say the delegate count now, as they tally it, they've got Obama with a majority of delegates. But I understand, we were just talking offline, that the Clinton campaign has already issued a statement saying they don't see it that way. So what's the word there?
I think they're probably doing last-minute jockeying for position. My guess is, and I have no way of knowing this, that Obama is still trying to scrape up the delegates today, and releasing something like that would be an inducement to other delegates to fall in line. It looks like Bill Clinton, said the other day that he thought Hillary would make a great vice president, and that is something, in fact, that she wants to go for now. But I hear that Obama would rather have his wisdom teeth re-extracted than have that happen. So it's only going to happen if the superdelegates make it happen. And so Obama's probably trying to get them to commit so that that doesn't have to happen. But, that's only a guess.
So it's looking, at least right this second, like the kind of nightmare scenario of the of a hideous kind of insurgency going all summer long. Maybe that won't materialize. That now the jockeying is for a number 2 slot or for a cabinet slot or for something, rather than a continued serious effort to contest the nomination.
Well, I'm sure that she doesn't want to have the superdelegates come in and impose a defeat on her.
Right.
And she'd rather, bow out gracefully. So it's probably an effort to stave off the superdelegates making that decision until she can negotiate for whatever does she want. Does she want her campaign debt paid off? Does she want a cabinet position? Does she want the vice presidency? I'm sure Obama wants to give her as little as possible, but also wants to have her meaningful support. I think you probably saw the Pew study this week that said that his support amongst white women has dropped.
Yeah.
10% in the past month, a little over 10%. That's a problem for him, and I think he's going to need her serious help. So, it's going to be a matter of keeping them enthusiastic. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I can certainly understand why Obama doesn't want Hillary as his VP. The idea and it's looking ahead to the administration. Whatever good she might be able to do on the campaign, or whatever bad she might be persuaded from not doing on the campaign trail by giving her the number 2 slot, then you got to think about the next 4 years or the next 8 years. And the idea of having the Clinton world down there at the VP mansion as a kind of, you almost feel like the court of the crown prince, where there's always scheming and plotting and subterfuge and undermining. I can't imagine that Obama would find that a tolerable prospect, having to wake up every day wondering what Bill Clinton is going to say. And I guess I have to wonder why would Hillary want to be vice president? Isn't it better to be a lioness of the Senate than to be, the second banana? But apparently she doesn't see it that way. That's what I gather.
I don't know. There's been a lot of trashing of her reputation in this particular cycle, and it's hard to walk off the stage with a big loss. One day you're in the middle of it, you're campaigning, you're before crowds of thousands, and she did get roughly half the Democratic votes. To walk off and lick your wounds with the camera light shining on somebody else might be difficult. She might just not want to have to take that blow. I don't know. I mean, that's pure speculation. But I have to wonder: is it going to make his chances in November easier to have Hillary on the ticket, though? I mean, if you're already one in your mind in November, and you're projecting for what's going to go on in the next 4 years, that's one thing. But he's by no means going to beat John McCain.
No, I agree with that. But she clearly has positives, right? That is, she prevents putting her on the ticket prevents people who are passionately committed to her from being disaffected. That's for sure. But she's not an unalloyed positive, right? She's got her share of baggage, and a lot of it really hasn't been picked over very effectively yet this campaign cycle. and she's got the big baggage of her hubby, and all of his post-presidential question marks, as we've seen in this recent Todd Purdom Vanity Fair piece. We haven't heard a lot of that kind of stuff. I imagine the Republicans will do their best to make hay of it in the fall. And plus, there's just a lot of people, in the country that have made up their mind about Hillary Clinton, and they hate her guts. And so
she does have strong negatives.
Anyway, I'm not sure she's an unambiguous plus. She clearly has pluses as a running mate, but I don't know how to net it all out. That's not my specialty. But it seems like it's not obvious that she's the best available VP candidate.
Well, I have to say, you mentioned the Rules Committee meeting earlier, and I was at that meeting this week.
Yes.
And a woman shouting in the back of the room toward the end that, Hillary had been robbed was ejected, and I tripped over Walter
You made her
Shapiro
famous.
running for the back door with a little flip for video camera that Elle Magazine had given me, and raced out into the hall where she was having a tirade, and I took it, and by the time she was out of the building, I had it up on YouTube, and since that time, it's had over 1 million hits, and it was shown on The Daily Show and Fox News, and then she was on Fox News, and she's become sort of the standard bearer for the disaffected Hillary voter
yes.
who thinks that Hillary was mistreated and are saying that they'll vote for John McCain. So the question is, are these people going to be so bitter and feel so sort of, disaffected by the process that they will either stay home or go for John McCain? Does Obama need Hillary on the ticket to heal that?
Right.
Because the math doesn't add up.
Well, let's talk about
take white women out of the equation. He's going to have a hard time, getting over that 270 hump.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the broader issues. But first, let's talk about this woman and your role in creating a Warholian celebrity.
I think she gets about 7.5 minutes.
Okay.
She's going to get 15.
Harriet Christian she's one angry lady, and I saw her on your blog, and then I saw that it had taken off and gotten a life of its own. But is she she's certainly a caricature of a point of view, but is it a revealing caricature? Is that kind of anger that we was robbed? Do you really think that is a widespread sentiment? It appears as if it is, if this Pew survey is to be trusted, that Obama's polling figures with women are cooling down. But maybe you could explain a little bit about where that's coming from, where that anger, as you see it, is, what its source is, and how it can be mollified. Can it only be mollified with Hillary on the ticket, or?
Well, she went on Fox News and said no. That she'll vote for McCain unless Hillary's on the top of the ticket.
Yeah.
She won't vote for Obama on the top of the ticket. So she may be an isolated incident, but the phenomenon may be bigger than this particular woman. One of the interesting things about, because I've never had a YouTube phenomenon before, what I'm putting it up was that it received 11,000 comments so far. And she became like a Rorschach test for what people think about this election. And it was like all of the seething resentment on both sides sort of came out. Sort of the underbelly that hasn't really kind of risen to the top now that, it's like this we're at the direct confrontation, who's going to win, moment. That all of this came out, and I was kind of shocked personally. I've watched it, the fight, and I know it's been acrimonious, but I kind of thought, well, all right, people have been getting used to the fact that Hillary Clinton probably wasn't going to win for a while. So when it became fait accompli, I kind of thought everybody would feel kind of like me and go, "Whew, I'm sure glad that's over."
Right.
But evidently that's not the case.
No, I went to the YouTube site and I went through 2 or 3 pages of comments, and boy, they are just vituperative and just really raw, open wounds of resentment and rage and anger and recrimination and.
But on both sides.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, back and forth.
It was like 50-50. It was crazy that everybody could watch. It was like the people watching the same video were seeing completely different things. Yeah, no, it's just the people who thought she was just, completely out of her mind, and then the people who just couldn't stand Obama and were totally siding with this woman, and
yeah, it's who knows what to make of these things, and certainly commenters on websites are often the most shrill and no offense, Blogging Heads TV commenters, you're a sage and temperate bunch, but
that's great. That will get you a link.
But elsewhere, on some other places in the blogosphere, commenters can aren't known for their table manners, but
it's true. But a lot of times, the anonymity of the internet allows people to say what they really.
That's
think.
right.
And they felt like somebody had ripped a Band-Aid off.
Yeah, no, I agree. So well, let's talk about then if particularly a particular part of the female electorate, and I'm guessing it's mostly older women. That's been a core of Hillary's constituency all along. These are the people that are most likely to sort of summon up all these kinds of feelings of their own personal past, of having been passed over by somebody of a younger man without the same credentials or experience, and all of that kind of thing. People who have went through the feminist wars when it was, and they've got the scars to prove it, and they really, really, really are invested in the idea of a woman president, and they came really, really close, and it really ticks them off that she's been, edged at the tape. I mean, are these people seriously going to vote for resolutely pro-life John McCain?
I think you're talking about two different groups of people there. One group of people are the feminists who have been through the choice wars. And I think they will come out and vote for whoever's on the Democratic ticket, because they're voting against John McCain. They're voting against another Alito on the Supreme Court. There's another group of women who were not engaged in the political process that came out for Hillary Clinton this time around. In New Hampshire and afterwards, it's the first scenario that you described. I think the woman who looks at Hillary Clinton and sees her own personal experience, right? And probably it may not, identify that strongly with the politics of the situation, and they may just be casting a vote against Barack Obama, or not coming out at all, which I think is more likely. That she really has kind of emotionally gotten these people engaged,
right?
And they're not going to think that far. They're not necessarily, much as I, a pro-choice voter, would like to believe that women vote based on that. It just never is that important when, particularly in this election, when people are listing their priorities. The economy, very important. The war, very important. Democratic women care about these things, and security as well. And I think I was speaking to a well-known pollster the other day who said that if on election day women think that John McCain will keep them safer than Barack Obama by a 10-point margin on election day, John McCain wins. Mm-hmm. And I think what this experience does is it opens up these women emotionally to hearing John McCain's message where they might not have been before, because they're angry, and it gives them a bit. So the numbers. How many is he going to lose if he doesn't have Hillary on the ticket? Does he put Kathleen Sebelius on the ticket? Does he put Governor Napolitano on the ticket? What does he do to make women believe that he has respect for them and for what they went through when they engaged in the political process this time?
And on the other side, does McCain make a identity politics bid for this swing vote by picking a female VP?
I think he absolutely will make a play for them, and I think that's already going on. You saw Geraldine Ferraro on Fox News a while ago. You saw, Harriet on Fox News.
Yep.
I mean, they're definitely carving out a niche for the disaffected Democratic woman of that age group who feels like she's been, betrayed in the situation. They're definitely playing that up. But I don't know, who would he pick on the right? I mean, the women, he's got Carly Fiorina, he's got, could he Would he pick Condi Rice? I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, but who knew Geraldine Ferraro before she was picked, right? So you could just it's not necessary that he pick someone with a pre-existing high profile. But that may look crass and opportunistic. I don't have any idea. Meanwhile, on the Obama side, does he? Not only is there the issue that he's pressured to pick Hillary, or maybe to pick some other woman to try to shore up this base of support, but it plays on other VP possibilities, right? I mean, there's been quite a boomlet of talk about Jim Webb as a VP candidate, but he has his vulnerabilities on the as far as some kind of anti-feminist statements that could exacerbate Obama's weakness with female voters, and so that may be enough to keep him off the ticket.
Well, sitting in that Rules Committee meeting, I sort of got the perception that the dynamic was shifting with regard to the vice president, because up until then the conversation had kind of been dominated by what white man would help Obama in Pennsylvania and Ohio.
Yep.
So, Jim Webb, and also to counter McCain's military credentials.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, Jim Webb was looking really good. Obama also has some work to do in the Hispanic community with Hispanic voters. So Bill Richardson was looking good. But both of them
have
gender
woman
problems.
issues.
And you could, the women screaming in the back of the room, you could sort of see their chances for the vice presidency kind of deflating. And, people like Mark Warner starting to kind of, ascend. Or Governor Strickland, somebody like that. I don't know.
No,
I have no idea what he feels like. I think a lot of it's going to be electoral math, and I think a lot of it's going to be chemistry. Who does he get along with? There was sort of an awkward feel, don't you think, between John Kerry and John Edwards last time? Like they didn't quite look very comfortable up there on the stage together.
That's right, and in contrast to Clinton and Gore, who didn't make the kind of traditional pick somebody from a state that I need kind of sense. They were both from Upper South. No regional diversity there, but they just looked good together. They looked young and forward-looking, and they clicked as a duo. So heaven knows. And of course you're constantly dodging one problem here only to encounter another one there. So if Obama does pick a woman VP without a lot of national security cred, then he's kind of vulnerable to being portrayed as a softy and naive on foreign affairs, and then if he picks someone who's plays into sexist stereotypes about not being strong because she's not a man, then that could expose him to vulnerability to McCain, war hero, guy people trust with the nation's security, whether appropriately or not. Anyway, it's endless kinds of noodling about a subject that usually, in retrospect, doesn't seem to make much difference who they pick. But that's what we have to talk about.
Yeah, I may be alone in this. A lot of people are talking about Wes Clark and how it would be really good to kind of boost up the military credentials of the ticket, but I sort of think John McCain wins that one if that's where the conversation goes.
Yeah.
So it might just be best to sort of look away from that and kind of keep the focus on being positive, being progressive, looking toward the future, and kind of looking away from that the frame that's kind of dominated politics for the past 8 years.
Well, getting past the kind of VP speculation and campaign speculation, let's talk about how we got to this point where in a primary race that is really noteworthy for its lack of substantive ideological divisions. Not that there aren't real policy differences between Clinton and Obama, but they pale in comparison to some policy differences amongst Democratic candidates or Republican candidates in primaries past. They're pretty much in accord on the big issues of the day. They've got the differences that are stark are differences of personal style and differences of demographic appeal. And yet those maybe it's because the differences are not about wonky substance, but rather about style and identity, that the divisions have gotten so bitter. But it seems like a strange thing that, I mean, you can picture Democrats tearing each other to shreds in '68 because, they disagreed about Vietnam, and that was really, really important. But there doesn't seem to be any issue of even remotely comparable moment here at stake in this race, and yet people, as we were talking about in the Harriet Miers video comments, they're at each other's throats. So what was this inevitable, or is it just a byproduct of these two candidates, or does it indicate some sort of deep fissures in the progressive movement, or will it all be papered over when Obama's the guy and everybody rallies around him, or what do you think?
Don't you think it was kind of inevitable when we had the first, African American with a serious shot at the presidency running directly ahead the first woman with a serious shot at the presidency? I mean, you've got two very large groups within the Democratic Party.
Yep.
Who, the party really relies on those two groups to deliver victories for them. And all of a sudden, these people are lining up based on looking at people whose personal experiences they really identify with in a deep and very passionate level. It's not an abstraction, as unfortunately the war is for a lot of people.
Right.
I mean, it affects remarkably few lives. In a direct and immediate way in this country, and that's probably why it's been allowed to go on for so long. But there's virtually no difference in their voting records. They're very, very similar politicians in terms of how they have comported themselves in the Senate. So all you've got is this sort of really emotional identification that people have with the candidates.
Yep.
And yeah. Somebody was gonna go home brokenhearted, and it turned out to be the ladies.
Yeah, no, I mean it's the double whammy of having the two finalists be a woman and a African American male. That if it had only been one of them versus a white guy, it could very well have been a very different story. But
I think you're right. I think that one of the, in terms of trying to go back over the conversation and figure out what's been happening, because it's been extremely emotional and contentious. It's like, if it had been a white guy running against either one of them, you would have had the identity politics against sort of, politics of power. Those two things clashing. But you had two groups that were sort of skilled in playing identity politics,
yep.
in operating within that realm, going against each other, and so it was confusing. It was hard to take. It was very raw, as you said. It's like the clash in that comment section.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of strange ironies about this campaign. That is, features of Democratic Party or progressive politics that normally are deployed against the right,
yes.
Have turned in on themselves and have created the Civil War. So the identity politics issue that is normally a culture war kind of left versus right issue, now it's a left versus left issue and getting nasty, and no less nasty without the clear ideological differences. And then the whole Clinton derangement syndrome, the Clinton hatred of the '90s was a feature of the right. Now there's a lot of people on the left who've discovered that they have Clinton derangement syndrome too, and they've come to hate and despise these people, and so that's a new thing too. But I don't know if this because these things aren't rooted in underlying substantive differences about the way the world works or what policies ought to be implemented. I don't know if they're kind of a summer storm and they'll blow over, or if because they are rooted in personal identity, something really, really deep and something that people can't compromise on, like they can compromise on a tax bill, whether this just portends nasty, ugly divisions going forward.
That's a really interesting observation, because I really did feel, as someone who sits over a blog and kind of moderates these enormous public conversations all day, that the vituperativeness with which the left confronts the right suddenly invaded the Democratic Party. And I couldn't remember, I don't think that the campaigns were nasty or ugly, or certainly as brutal as others I've recalled in my lifetime. But the supporters were, it was Fight Club every day.
Yes. Well, that leads me to a question that, where I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Do you feel at all, looking at this mayhem, like Dr. Frankenstein? That is, the netroots have helped to create and foster this online community of activists with an explicit credo, not rooted in sort of policy wonkish ideological agendas, but more in a general sensibility of we're tired of being apologetic for being Democrats and progressives. We're tired of Democratic Leadership Council, dime store Reaganomics. We're tired of letting the right set the agenda and us reacting to it. We're tired of them framing the issues and framing them in a way that's unfavorable to us. And we want to fight back, damn it. And we want to be really aggressive. And we want to make this a good versus evil fight. And we're the good guys, and they've got the black hats. And we want to be no holds barred, unapologetic partisans. In short, we want to summon up, get our blood up, and summon up moral passion, and think about things in a kind of Manichaean way. So has this exercise of everyone getting their blood up created a bunch of sort of hyped up, steroid maddened, fanatics who now are tearing each other to shreds?
Yes and no. I think the blogosphere largely arose in response to what people saw as the unchecked domination of right-wing ideology in the media narrative.
Yeah.
That, the Scooter Libby trial, which my blog covered extensively, was kind of like, every day there was some new layer of the onion you peeled where you found that, members of the mainstream media were very, very complicit with the Bush administration in keeping the truth from the public. And as people realized that, you had this new medium coming forward that really lowered, with very low, bars for entry, that anybody could walk into and start writing. And the thing that kind of gathered people to it energetically was kind of this Howard Beale sense of, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore.
Yeah.
Because you had people like myself who spent the 90s like throwing things at the television set during impeachment.
Yes.
Who suddenly, didn't know anybody in their own community who felt that way, who could go online and find somebody in Nebraska and somebody in Indiana and somebody in Massachusetts who felt that way, and we could come together and we could talk about it, and that was great. So that kind of propelled people together.
Yeah.
And yes, there was a loud tenor and tone, but I think they were walking into a very sort of polarized environment already.
Already, of course.
This was like some abstract decision that we made to get people's attention. Over the course of the election, I think that factors of identity politics, totally outside of us, came to dominate the way this race was discussed. And I think that we were more the, being led around by the nose by something much larger and completely outside of us, in terms of how that tenor got to be kind of extreme on the blogs. But given the fact that that was the environment that had already been established, yeah, I think it just got amped up even more by what people they felt they had at stake emotionally in this contest. So is that a yes and a no?
Yeah, I think so. It's passion, moral passion, and particularly a sort of a passionate moral certitude is a powerful turbocharger of political movements, but it's also a very dangerous kind of thing that can burn out of control and can lead in unexpected directions. So just as an analog on the right, you had you've had over the years in the ascendancy of the right an alliance between more libertarian type people like myself,
Such as yourself,
who were relatively socially liberal, had no sympathy with the religious rights agenda or worldview, but had common enemies and some common agendas, and who saw as extremely useful the moral passion and organizing oomph of the religious right to get out the votes for an agenda that they could sign on to a good chunk of. So you've seen the right bring together a more cool-headed, policy substance-oriented group of people who lacked both passion and numbers, make a devil's bargain with a group of people they didn't really like very much or see eye to eye with, but who were, again, passionate and numerous. And then it blew up in their faces, right? So people like me, a libertarian who nonetheless pretty much always voted for Republicans from Reagan forward. Sometimes I didn't vote at all, but I never really voted for Democrats. I certainly always thought of myself as neither conservative nor liberal, but I consistently saw the conservatives as the lesser of two evils, and I discounted the influence of the religious right because it seemed to me they normally got sort of lip service rather than big wins on the policy front. But anyway, what happened was I feel like ultimately those guys took over the asylum, and the Republican Party really in recent years has lost whatever kind of libertarian DNA it had, and has now just become sort of a right-wing populist pandering to religious fundamentalism big government party of its own, and that's a horrifying. That's something that holds zero appeal to people like me, and so a lot of us are now. I voted straight D in 2006, and I'm up in the air about 08. But it's when you awaken moral passions in people, it gives you it gives you a big plus in the short term, but it can lead to results that aren't so great over time, or at least ones you didn't see coming.
Do you really think, though, that the Republican Party is taken over by the religious right? Because I would imagine that you, as a smaller government guy, would see the no bid contracts as the $1 trillion war, the skyrocketing spending,
yes,
and look to the corporatist wing of the Republican Party for responsibility. Because I don't think the snake handlers in Kentucky really care about Halliburton.
No, that's right. So I've oversimplified. I think there is a great deal of again right-wing populism that is aimed at evangelicals, not necessarily on their religious issues, but just gay bashing and Mexican bashing, and the terrorists are under every bed, and if we don't win in Iraq, they're going to blow us up. Just basically other bashing, other than whites bashing, is aimed at a group of people that is and tinged with Bush's explicitly evangelical rhetoric, has got a lot of people who run the nitty gritty of party machinery in the Republican Party are evangelicals who see George W. Bush still as God's man in the White House, and they are then pawns themselves. They haven't gotten a lot out of this. They're pawns for the K Street gang to award all kinds of plunder to themselves, and so I'm not saying that they won, but their passion was used and certainly edged out people like me from having any influence over what the Republican Party's agenda is, and have also been kind of useful idiots themselves. So you might see well, you're going to see if the Democrats take the White House and both houses of Congress, then what's kept everybody together, which is Bush hatred and Republican control of Congress hatred, that all goes away, and what becomes salient are the differences, and there are real differences. And the bigger the Democratic Party gets, and the wider its appeal gets, the more heterogeneous it gets, and the more these differences rise to the surface and become more important. And then, if you've got everybody ramped up with, white hats versus black hats moral passion, then it could be a very, nasty, rather than a progressive moment, it could just be a real ugly internecine mess.
Well, I think in terms of Congress, we're going to see the exacerbation of a kind of a situation that dominates politics in the House right now, which is that real control is vested in the hands of the blue dogs, the sort of corporatists who I would imagine would appeal to you, and they're, we're not going to vote for anything except the war that we don't find a way to pay for. So, and anytime they want to join with the Republicans or the Democrats in order to pass legislation, they do, and that's probably not going to change in the next House. But I think that you're right in that the thing that has bound us all together for so long on the left has been opposition to George Bush, and we never sort of looked at each other to see who we were standing next to, and that has started to to break down in this race as the divides between the ideological, the business, the social safety net people, healthcare, all of these coalitions are looking at each other and going, okay, now how are we going to divvy up the pie here?
Right.
And I think you're right. It could become increasingly contentious because there's going to be something to argue about now.
Yeah.
The possibility of actually passing something is going to happen. So I think it's going to turn into more of a sausage-making conversation online.
Yeah, so I was a little rambling in my last setup, but a lot of this is just kind of autobiographical, and I don't know whether it's just middle-aged disillusionment on my part or whether I've stumbled into some kind of wisdom, but the whole idea of this kind of white-knuckled, red-faced partisan zealotry strikes me as not the right way to go, and in part because it summons up this moral passion that we are the good guys and they are the bad guys, which then can be used for internal squabbles as well, as we're seeing in the Democratic Party, but which never really maps very well onto an American political party or an American political movement. America is not a very ideologically rigorous country, and we're certainly an incredibly diverse and heterogeneous country, and we've got two parties, the ins and the outs, the R's and the D's, and we've got two reigning ideologies, which are something between political philosophies and rationalizations for prior commitments, conservatism and liberalism or progressivism, and they're not incredibly coherent things, and they change over time, and so if you're invested in the idea that your semi-coherent grab bag of constituencies, ideas, and loyalties is the good guys, then you don't see coming what happens when you get in power. So, again, all along, on net, I thought that the cause of smaller government and freer markets would be well served by more conservative Republicans in power. I thought that through the 80s and 90s, until they got in control of all of the power, and then they just turned out to be squalid and corrupt, and intellectually corrupt and venally corrupt, and it was... And so I have a terrible taste in my mouth for identifying with a partisan movement in any way, in a particularly one way, as far as I'm compared to many people. And I wonder if a similar kind of disillusionment is coming for people on the left side of the political spectrum, that they've rediscovered their mojo here with hating Bush, and that's a worthy cause, but they've kind of talk themselves into the idea that they represent something more coherent than they really do, and once they take power, and if they do, if Obama wins and the Democrats increase their majorities in both houses, as I expect they will, the the us that people were identifying with may start, disintegrating on them.
Well, in theory, bipartisanship is a great idea, and working together, reaching across the aisle. But for the past 8 years, that hasn't happened. Bipartisanship, in the eyes of the Republicans, has meant giving us what we want.
Yeah.
And it hasn't resulted in any of the things that the American people are interested in as their top priorities. Getting health care, which I'm sure you're no fan of.
I'm in favor of health care.
Which in fact you might be.
I'm sorry, what was the second issue you raised?
Ending the war.
Yeah.
They elected a Democratic Congress in 2006, and the approval ratings of the Congress are even lower than George Bush because they have failed to achieve any of these objectives.
Right.
And that's largely due to Republican obstructionism. So, it's a nice theory. The chief proponent of it, Joe Lieberman, in kind of the vocal, can't we all just get along? He's a liar.
Yeah.
His candidacy was based on his ads said nobody wanted to get out of Iraq more than me. And can't we all just get along? And now that he doesn't have to answer to the people of Connecticut anymore, nobody's a bigger warmonger than Joe. Surprising, I don't know who. But, so it's nice rhetoric, but is it going to be an effective tactic for dealing with what we need to do? Upcoming, the entrenched power in Washington D.C. has just flipped from R to D, and does that mean that the K Street lobbyists have new people to give their money to so that they can get their corporate welfare? Does it mean that the Democrats just get the better parking spaces now?
Right.
I mean, we want to think that we're going to get more than that, and we don't expect that these people are going to respond differently than they did in 2006 just because there's, potentially a Democrat in the president's seat. So we think that it's going to still be a fight. It's still going to be contentious. And yeah, I do believe I'm right about ending the war and seeing that the country is adequately provided for in terms of health care. So, and I'm willing to do battle over that.
Yeah,
that's just my perspective, and I don't think anybody's going to help me do that on the Republican side of the aisle.
No, I understand that, and let me distinguish what I'm talking about, which I fear is utterly quixotic anyway, from what you were just talking about, which is bipartisanship. Bipartisanship, I find, leaves me utterly cold. In the split the difference, go along, get along, kind of take the existing tribes and their packages of constituencies and priorities and split some difference between those. That's David Broderism, and it holds no appeal to me whatsoever. What I'm interested in are people who have broken from the whole tribal mindset, and I think it's only going to be a minority of people, but a minority of articulate, smart people can wield disproportionate influence in the internet world. People who are tired of tribalism of any kind and are suspicious of politicians, and knowing that politicians are likely to sell out and are more interested in power than in just about anything else, and who can look past those tribal identities and tribal loyalties to figure out what objectively we might do to make this a better country. I don't know that again, that all sounds sort of airy-fairy and pie in the sky, but I know that I have conversations with people who have different partisan loyalties than I have had, or have different emotional reactions to the partisan circus than I do. But when we get past that and just talk about real things and real problems in the country and things like intergenerational poverty, or 12 million undocumented aliens in this country that are in this sort of legal limbo, or the complete kludgy mess of our healthcare financing system, for sure, or the fact that there's 3 billion people in the world trying to make do on less than $2 a day. There's lots of important issues that are hard and don't really aren't susceptible to, and they're important because they're really, really important. The ones I mentioned, I think, are all very important. They aren't susceptible to kind of bumper sticker solutions. I think they're a spirit of empirical open-mindedness about what actually could be done to solve some of these problems or ameliorate some of these problems is one that might bring together inventive and promising solutions if the right people got in the right spirit and started talking across party lines. So again, within Washington, kind of blah centrist deal-making bipartisanship, I'm not interested in. What I'm interested in is kind of intellectual transpartisanship, getting people to look past the spectacle and the circus and think about substance.
I think that's a noble goal, and I think that it's very possible, and I like to think that at its best that's what the blogosphere does. But when it comes to convincing politicians to join us in that quest,
yeah,
and not sort of look to K Street for their morality, I think sometimes a sledgehammer is going to be necessary. And that gets interpreted as extreme partisanship.
Yeah, I see. Look, I'm all for smashing the Republicans' grip on power in Washington.
We're left to the Democrats too. I don't think there's any difference on that.
What's that?
That they're just as easily,
yeah.
The telecos are no longer given to the Republicans; they're given to the Democrats, and that's true with many industries.
Yeah. So that's right. But that is that you're going to get a meet the new boss, same as the old boss, to some extent. I mean, you're just going to. That's the way Washington works. And so not glamorizing your side over much is useful, or inoculates you. You're getting too bitterly disappointed with these people. But anyway, I feel that often this kind of passion about making the world a better place gets co-opted into the political process and into red versus blue, R versus D, and then it just ends up, supplying electoral muscle for the kind of insider Washington game that goes on as usual, and so people get they might deploy their passion more constructively by looking open-mindedly for real public policy solutions and not thinking about public policies in terms of ideological commitment. That is, the idea that I think you're an evil socialist because you're in favor of universal health care, and you think I'm an evil social Darwinist because I think switching from a pay-as-you-go Social Security system to one based on private savings. I mean, I find it sad that we have to get all Manichaean about public policy. What we ought to be very firm in our commitments about values and what we think is good and what we think is bad. But the means to those ends, I would like to see separated from and considered distinctly from ideological loyalties. So that's my pitch for Can We All Get Along?
All right.
And on that score, I just want to talk a little bit about in this us versus them vein, defining who us is. So, and in particular, I'm thinking about me. That I used to be. Never thought of myself as a conservative, but I thought of myself as a conservative sympathizer. Don't think that way anymore. Think that my values and are a better fit these days with the center left than with the right. But I hold some public policy views that send a lot of people on the center left, running and screaming away. But I hold up plenty of others that are, right on line. So on civil liberties issues and the war, belatedly, but now that's where I am. On immigration issues, on drug war issues, crime issues, foreign policy issues more generally. I think there's a lot of congeniality between libertarian-leaning people like me and liberals and progressives. It's economics and taxing and spending that are the issues that are the big dividing line between us. And the question is that dividing line bridgeable? So within the progressive liberal community now, there's all kinds of diversity. There's people who are considered good progressives, but they're off the reservation on this, or they're off the reservation on that, and they're tolerated and considered members in good standing of the big tent, but where those lines are is unclear. And right now the Democrats are smelling the opportunity, and liberals and progressives are smelling the opportunity to take back the center from the right and from the Republicans, and which means they have to be more outgoing and welcoming of people that traditionally voted the other way. So I think it's a time when the ideological boundaries ought to be re-examined and rethought. And so I was just thinking about this because I did this TPM Cafe book club discussion a couple of weeks ago with Eric Alterman's new book, Why We're Liberals. And I read it, and I really liked it. And particularly his sort of theoretical description of what liberalism is, and these kind of paeans to individualism and Enlightenment values. That's all stuff that I'm 100% on board on. And plenty of his policy discussions are things that I say, exactly right. But on a lot of economic stuff, I think, well, that's just not right. That's just empirically not the way the world works, and that liberal progressive values would be better served by a different mix of policies. So the question is, are people like me welcome in this in the liberal progressive big tent to make our arguments as strange but well-meaning and good-hearted liberals, or are we just sort of technical allies of convenience right now because we're disaffected with the Republicans?
Hell yeah, you're welcome. I'm offering you the official liberal, welcome wagon.
Excellent. So,
I think it's going to be, on a issue by issue basis. That there will be coalitions built, and I think that there is very much a common interest in keeping, the sort of new pigs from feeding at the taxpayer trough for fun and profit. I also think, in the FISA battle that we're in right now, that there is a very common interest. We've, taken sides with Bob Barr, who, and if I can get over what, my feelings for him during the impeachment years, to embrace him as my fellow, long-haired liberal freak standing in a circle holding hands singing Kumbaya, let us fight against retroactive immunity. I think anything is possible. But I think that that's one of many issues, and I think that we're going to have to form coalitions like that, because the entrenched power, as you say, is, if left to its own devices, is just going to sort of shift from one party to the next.
I wrote a piece in the New Republic a year and a half ago or so with this ungainly title of libertarians, where I was making this pitch that I think ideological alliances are kind of and loyalties are kind of in flux these days, especially libertarian types are really increasingly disinfected with their right and looking to whether they might belong more with people on the left and making a bid for some kind of entente or deeper engagement, intellectual engagement between libertarians and liberals and progressives.
I think that's a good thing. We probably ain't going to walk into the sunset over.
No, right. But the thing is, when I wrote that, it was it got a fair amount of attention, almost all of it negative, so in particular, people on the left said, to hell with you, we don't need your kind, and a lot of the sort of Washington blog commentariat saying this is just this is not a viable hybrid, but. That's what they say, and they've got their own shtick to defend, and that's fine. But I think it's really happening anyway. At least there's some pretty important growing constituencies in the Democratic Party, certainly money constituencies on Wall Street and Silicon Valley, people who are just completely culturally repulsed by the identity of the GOP and therefore think of themselves as Democrats, but who are impeccably socially liberal, but who are entrepreneurial and market oriented and don't buy into a lot of the kind of labor union, social democratic kind of economic policy agenda. So those folks,
we're going to be a steel cage death match over that one because I think that unions are really important to a strong middle class. But me and Bob Barr over FISA, I'm not going to him out of bed.
Right, I understand that, but I'm just saying here's a group of people who are coming into the Democratic Party, and once they come in and start contributing money and contributing votes and contributing influence, you can't stop them. You can, I guess, but anyway, they're starting to come in, and they're going to exercise influence as a group within as far as if Dems are in uniform control of the political branches of government, there's going to be all kinds of different subspecies of Democrats and liberals, and the free market liberal type is one that I think is not statistically insignificant. Let's just put it that way.
Well, don't you think that Bill Clinton was a pretty aggressive free market?
Yeah, I do. I think he was.
I mean, I wasn't happy about it, but
right.
If I was of that mind,
yeah. I think in retrospect, just substantively, he was pretty much this kind of libertarian fusionist figure. The problem was that his personal biography and his personal vulnerabilities made him into such a classic kind of culture war polarizing figure that the fusionist moment got lost. The culture war stuff got translated into to demonizing him as a person and an individual, and which frittered away the right wing into just a trivial obsession with this one guy. But anyway, he wasn't able to bridge that ideological gap because of the unique features of his personality and biography. Whereas Obama could. His various sort of hardcore lefty personal associations have clouded that more than back earlier this campaign season. But he's still, there's plenty of people, again, who are free market oriented, but who are really taking Obama seriously, precisely because of this transpartisan appeal that he exudes, at least rhetorically.
Well, okay, let's just disabuse people of one notion right now. As a card-carrying liberal, I can tell you Barack Obama is not that liberal, and I don't say that as a good thing, okay?
Right.
This is not a compliment. His voting score was somehow extrapolated through a really, really erroneous metric to rate him as the most liberal member of the Senate, because they didn't count all the votes that he had missed. They didn't factor that in because he was out campaigning. He just isn't. He is pretty much of a solid centrist. And one of the great myths of the Obama campaign is that this has all been financed, by $5 at a time by school teachers.
Right.
Obama actually was the number one choice of hedge fund managers. He,
I can absolutely picture his
crowd was like financing his campaign when it first started. And in fact, one of the reasons many people think that he'll never accept Hillary on the ticket is that because many of his supporters sort of looked to the Clinton campaign and their whole machine and said, wow, no room at the inn. I'm going with this guy because I have a chance here. So they've supported him from the start, and they don't want any Clintons in the room because they don't want those people back because they feel like there won't be any room for them. So his whole donor, big donor class is looking at the campaign and saying, "Ha, we paid for this. We don't want to have to deal with the Terry McAuliffes and all the other people that go along with that. We don't want them in this picture." So he may be under pressure from within the people who helped him get there, not to have the Clintons along, but he all along has had strong business support. I don't think he is like guy. If you kind of, he's not bleeding granola sprouts. That's just not who that guy is. So I think that business will have a very friendly, character in the White House, if that's what.
You see, you've reassured me. You're talking me into pulling the lever for him. But let me just say, I am not. I do not think of myself at all as pro-business. I mean, I'm in general, right? Business is a good thing, but the corporate agenda and the free market agenda are often two completely different things, and that's what I'm for is competition and competitive markets, not for the lobbying agenda of American big business. But anyway, the idea that there are people who are big investors and oriented towards market life, who see promise in Obama is not at all surprising to me, and I do think there's he's still kind of a cipher because he doesn't have that much of a record, but there's at least a non-crazy basis for people like me to project some sort of hopes that he wouldn't be all bad on the domestic front, and certainly he'd be from my perspective the preferable candidate on the foreign policy front. So we've now talked for an hour, and we're ending here on a moment of sort of cagey liberal libertarian unity. So should we stop while we're ahead?
I think it's probably that sounds good to me. I think that we've mapped out a future for
okay. So
a libertarian liberal coalition going forward to fight back against. There being more of the same stealing, Washington D.C. stealing that doesn't wind up aiding anybody, but it doesn't wind up aiding the people who need to be aided.
There you go. All right. Well, next time we'll dig into each other about stuff we disagree about. But right now, let's end on gauzy unity.
All right.
Nice talking to you, Jane.
Nice to talk to you too.
All right. Bye-bye.